The dust rose in slow sheets along the wagon road, the kind that clung to a man's boots and a woman's skirts and followed them home like a witness. Folks along the frontier had learned to read that dust. It meant travelers. It meant trouble. Or it meant nothing at all, just another day stretching thin under a hard sun. When the man stepped out of it, leading a tired horse with one hand and holding a small bundle tight against his chest with the other, the town went quiet in a way that felt heavier than noise. He did not look like the men who came to trade hides or ask for nails. His hair fell long and dark against his shoulders, braided with care, and his face carried the lines of wind and years spent watching the land more than people. His buckskins were worn clean, mended again and again, and the moccasins on his feet were near done. He walked straight into the street, not fast and not slow, like someone who had already decided what would happen and would accept it either way. The bundle in his arm stirred. A small sound came from it, thin and sharp, the cry of a child whose strength was running out. The man stopped in front of the general store, eyes lifting to the porch where a few men had gathered, their hands resting near their belts out of habit. He bowed his head once, not in weakness, but in respect. "I ask for milk," he said. His English was careful, shaped by effort. "For my little girl." No one spoke. The wind pushed at the sign above the door, making it creak. A woman standing near the well felt her throat tighten. She had heard that sound before, the hungry cry that cut through sleep and daylight alike. It had lived in her house not long ago. She stepped forward before she could think better of it. She was young, but the softness of her face had been hardened by the same land that hardened everyone else. Her hands were rough from work, her dress plain and faded. She had buried her husband the winter before, when the cold came early and did not let go. She had given birth in the spring, when the rivers ran high, and the baby had lived only a few weeks. Since then, her body had not yet learned to forget. "I have milk," she said quietly. The men on the porch shifted. Someone cleared his throat. This was not the sort of thing towns talked about, not out loud. It crossed lines people preferred to keep sharp and clean. The Apache man looked at her then, really looked, and something in his eyes changed. Not hope exactly, but a kind of careful trust, the kind you give when you have nothing left to lose. He stepped closer, slow enough not to frighten her. The baby's face was red and tight with crying, her small hands curling weakly at the air. The woman felt the ache in her chest, a deep pull that had haunted her nights. She did not look at the watching crowd. She looked only at the child. They went inside her house because it was the closest and because no one stopped them. The door closed, cutting off the stairs and the whispers. The room was small and smelled of soap and wood smoke. A cradle sat empty near the wall, its blankets neatly folded like they were waiting. The man stood awkwardly, unsure where to place himself. He unwrapped the child with hands that trembled despite his effort to stay steady. The woman sat and took the baby, holding her with a confidence born not of ease, but of memory. The child latched on, desperate at first, then slower, steadier. The crying stopped. Outside, time stretched thin. The Apache man sank to his knees, not as a show, but because his legs gave out. He pressed his forehead to the floor, breathing hard. He did not weep. He simply stayed there, letting the sound of his daughter feeding fill the space where fear had lived. When it was done, the woman wrapped the baby carefully and handed her back. The little girl slept, her face soft now, her breathing even. The man took her like something sacred. "I cannot pay," he said. She shook her head. "No payment." He studied her, then nodded. "I will remember." Word spread fast, the way it always did. By evening, everyone knew. Some said the woman was foolish. Some said she was brave. Some said she had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. She did not answer them. That night, when she lay awake listening to the quiet, she felt the familiar ache return and wondered if she had done a kindness or invited something she did not yet understand. The man returned the next day, and the day after that. Each time he came with care, never alone, never at night. Sometimes he brought dried meat or herbs, setting them down without ceremony. Sometimes he brought nothing but his daughter and that same steady look. The town watched from a distance, suspicion mixing with a strange, uneasy respect. No harm came. No trouble followed. Yet the air felt charged, like a storm waiting beyond the hills. As the days passed, the woman learned pieces of his life without asking. He had lost his wife to sickness during a long journey south. The tribe had moved on, driven by pressure and broken promises, and he had fallen behind with a child too weak to travel fast. Milk was life, and he had run out of time. She did not tell him about her own loss. She did not need to. Grief recognized grief without words. The land around them seemed to hold its breath. Soldiers rode through once, their blue coats bright against the brown earth. They looked hard at the Apache man and harder at the woman's door. Nothing happened. But the look stayed with her long after the dust settled. One evening, as the sun bled red along the horizon, the man lingered longer than usual. He stood in the doorway, his daughter sleeping peacefully, and spoke in a low voice. "There are others," he said. "Children." Her heart sank. She understood at once. One kindness had opened the door to many needs, and the world beyond the town was harsher than most here cared to admit. Before she could answer, a shout rose from the far end of the street. Hooves thundered. A rider came hard and fast, fear written plain on his face. The Apache man turned, body tensing, eyes narrowing toward the sound. The woman felt the room tilt, the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. Whatever peace had been found in this small act of mercy was about to be tested, and she knew, with a certainty that left no room for doubt, that nothing would be simple from here on. The rider came to a sudden halt, throwing up a cloud of dust and making the small wooden signs along the street rattle against their posts. His eyes were wide, scanning the town like a hawk, and when they fell on the Apache man, there was recognition and fear that made the air feel heavier. The man stepped protectively closer to his daughter, who stirred slightly in his arms. The woman moved behind them instinctively, hands clenched at her sides, unsure if she could help or if her presence would make things worse. The rider gasped for breath, finally able to speak. "Bandits," he said. "A group down the canyon. They've been raiding settlements. They're coming this way." His voice trembled, more from the news he carried than the ride itself. The townspeople who had gathered earlier murmured in alarm. Some looked ready to run, others gripped rifles and knives, eyes sharp with defensive instinct. The Apache man lowered his daughter into her blanket and crouched, scanning the horizon. He had traveled far, learned to read the land in ways most people never could. He could tell by the shapes of the hills and the faint outline of trees which way the threat moved. His jaw tightened. He had come seeking help, but now it seemed the danger was bigger than either he or the woman could handle alone. "You'll need to hide," he said quietly, more to the woman than to the townspeople. "Children and those who cannot fight must not be seen." His words were deliberate, careful. Even in English, he carried the weight of command. The woman nodded, her mind racing. The room where her home's few children slept would have to be emptied, the doors locked, blankets stacked to muffle sounds. She had done what she could for one child, but now it seemed the burden had multiplied. Outside, the townspeople began to form makeshift defenses. Boards were pulled from the fences, doors reinforced, and a handful of men moved to gather what firearms the town possessed. The Apache man studied them, noting the lack of training and the hesitation in their movements. These were not soldiers, he thought. They were farmers and shopkeepers, a people unpracticed in real battle. His chest tightened. He had faced bloodier skies and sharper weapons, but the fear in the eyes of the innocent brought a new kind of tension. The woman moved closer to him, lowering her voice. "What do we do?" He shook his head slightly. "We wait. but we do not wait helpless. We prepare. He gestured toward the small store at the end of the street. Barricades here. People with rifles spread along the rooftops. Those who cannot fight inside. And someone must keep watch. Her stomach nodded, but she obeyed. She knew fear, and she knew courage had to appear even when it was absent. She moved quickly, gathering what blankets and furniture she could to cover doors and windows, checking each room for children or the elderly. Some of the townspeople followed her lead. Others watched from behind boards and fences, unsure whether to help or to flee. The Apache man went to the edge of town, scanning the hills and valleys with eyes sharpened by years on the trail. He could see faint dust clouds in the distance, the telltale signs of riders moving fast, their intent clear. These were not wanderers. They carried weapons and had chosen a target. He clenched his fists. Survival depended on timing, on preparation, on the instinct to move before the enemy could act. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the street, he noticed a figure standing apart from the approaching group. A tall man, wearing the remains of a uniform, mounted on a dark horse. There was something different about him, a deliberate presence that drew attention. Even among bandits, some carried authority. The Apache man felt the shift immediately, the quiet that accompanies someone who is more than just a threat. They are a reckoning. Back inside, the woman finished setting up a room for the children, stacking blankets to create a makeshift fort. The babies and young ones were already quiet, sensing tension even without knowing its cause. She paused for a moment, wiping sweat from her forehead, and allowed herself a single thought. She had thought danger had passed with the feeding of one child, but here it was again, multiplied, impossible to ignore. The Apache man returned to her side. His gaze was sharp, always moving, always calculating. They will test the town first, weak points, those they can break without effort. He spoke without fear, though his voice carried urgency. We must not show weakness, she nodded again. And if they come to the houses? He glanced toward the window. The horizon was still calm, but the air carried tension. Then we fight, he said simply. I do not know if we survive, but we do not surrender. A sudden noise from outside made them both turn. A horse whinnied, a board splintered underweight, and the townspeople tensed along the street. From the shadows of the far hills, a single rider emerged, separated from the band behind him. He slowed as he approached, then stopped abruptly in the middle of the road. The Apache man's hand went to the hilt of his knife, the instinctive reaction of someone trained to defend against threats. The rider raised his hands, holding something in the light. The townspeople squinted. The sun reflected off the polished surface of what appeared to be a folded note or a small metal box. I come with a message, the rider called out. His voice carried easily across the street, calm and precise, the opposite of fear. From the bandits, and from someone who knows your kind. The woman's pulse quickened. From someone who knows him? She whispered to the Apache man. He did not answer immediately. He stepped forward, cautiously studying the figure. There was tension in every muscle, every movement. The rider was not a simple messenger. He carried authority, knowledge, maybe even danger that could not be measured by ordinary means. The townspeople murmured, some moving closer, others taking cover. The air seemed to thicken as the Apache man walked toward the rider, the baby still wrapped in blankets at his side. The rider lowered the note or box carefully. "Read it," he said, "if you dare." A hush fell. The Apache man's fingers brushed the object before lifting it. His eyes scanned the contents quickly. There was a name, a place, a warning of attacks not just on this town, but along the path of settlements stretching for miles. The handwriting was jagged and hurried, the kind that carries desperation and intent all at once. The woman leaned in, trying to see, but he motioned her back. "This is not for you yet," he said softly. His gaze met hers for a fraction of a second. It will touch you soon enough. A sudden wind kicked up, scattering dust and stray leaves. Somewhere down the canyon, a scream rose, raw and urgent. The townspeople stiffened, looking toward the hills that framed their home. The Apache man folded the note, slipping it inside his shirt. He straightened, shoulders squared, eyes scanning the edges of the town and the hills beyond. "They are closer than they say," he muttered. Faster and more organized, he turned back to the woman. "The child must not know fear. You must hide her." She did as he commanded, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the blankets and ensured the baby was shielded from sight. The little girl murmured in her sleep, a sound so small and fragile it made the tension in the room feel sharper, more immediate. From the porch, one of the men muttered about guns, numbers, and towns falling to greed and fire. The Apache man did not respond. Words were meaningless now. Action was all that mattered. He felt the history of his people behind him, the lessons learned in deserts, mountains, and bloodied valleys. Survival was strategy, but mercy was a choice, and he had already chosen that once today. Another figure appeared at the edge of the street, cloaked in shadow. The Apache man's gaze narrowed. This one moved differently, almost like the wind itself was guiding him, deliberate, cautious, yet unmistakably confident. The woman stepped back, instinctively pulling the baby closer. Even the townspeople seemed to sense the weight of the newcomer, shifting nervously, whispering prayers they barely remembered learning. The Apache man stepped in front of the woman and child, his body angled toward the shadowed figure. "Who are you?" he demanded. The figure paused, the sun catching on a glint of metal at his belt. "I am someone who knows the path you walk," he said slowly, words deliberate and measured. "And the choice you must make will reach farther than this town, farther than the hills. It will touch lives you do not yet know." The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible to ignore. The woman's hands trembled around the blanket, and even the Apache man felt the stir of unease, a rare crack in his measured calm. The wind shifted again, carrying the faint sound of hooves, the echo of an approaching storm. The townspeople stiffened, realizing that their small world was about to collide with something larger, something they could neither control nor predict. The Apache man lowered his head slightly, closing his eyes for just a moment. Then he opened them again, sharper than before. "We will be ready," he said, though his words were more to steel himself than to offer reassurance. The shadowed figure took a step closer. Being ready is not the same as being safe. The choice before you may demand what you cannot give freely. Remember this. A shiver ran through the street. The baby stirred, and the woman held her tighter. The man in buckskins looked toward the horizon, toward the hills where the dust rose faint but relentless. And in that moment, the town understood that what had begun with a simple act of mercy milk for a child was only the start. The world beyond their small settlement was vast, dangerous, and determined to test the limits of courage and compassion alike. The Apache man's hand rested on the blanket covering his daughter. His jaw tightened. The shadowed figure did not move. The wind whispered through the buildings, carrying the distant sound of hooves and a promise that nothing would remain unchanged by the coming hours. Inside, the woman held the baby close, feeling the fragile warmth against her chest. Outside, the townspeople braced. The future stretched uncertain and wide, a road of choices, threats, and the weight of survival. And somewhere beyond the hills, the dust of approaching danger rolled like a tide, unstoppable, relentless, waiting for the moment to strike. The Apache man and the woman shared a single glance. Neither spoke, but the understanding was clear. Mercy had a price, courage demanded sacrifice, and the story of the little girl and all who stood around her was far from over. The sun sank lower behind the hills, painting the horizon in streaks of red and orange that made the town feel smaller, more fragile. The Apache man remained near the edge of the street, his eyes never leaving the faint dust clouds rising in the distance. Every movement of the hills, Every flicker of shadow across the dirt road was recorded and analyzed in his mind. Survival was measured in seconds here, in choices made before danger even spoke. The woman moved silently through her small house, checking the doors and windows again. She had locked every latch, stacked furniture against the entrances, and whispered soft reassurances to the baby who slept unaware of the storm gathering just outside. Her hand shook despite herself. She had helped one child already, but now the lives of more people she barely knew rested in her decisions, in her willingness to act calmly under threat. From the street, murmurs began again. Some of the men were trying to organize, others simply stood frozen, staring at the hills as if the approaching riders were ghosts rather than men. One of them, a lanky farmer with a rifle nearly as tall as himself, spoke up. "Maybe we should run," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "We can't fight them all." The Apache man turned toward him, eyes sharp and unyielding. "Running will not save you. It will only make it easier for them. Stand or you fall. The choice is yours." His tone was calm, but it carried authority. The men flinched under it, recognizing that words alone could not match the power of experience he carried. A faint whistle came from the canyon beyond the town, sharp and deliberate. The townspeople froze. The woman's heart pounded. Even from this distance, the sound was a warning, an announcement that the attackers were not far, that they were organized, that they understood strategy. The Apache man knelt beside a barrel in the street, inspecting it for cover. His hands moved quickly, checking for stability, calculating angles, imagining how bullets or arrows might strike. Survival was a map in his mind, a set of probabilities that could shift in an instant. From another side of town, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a young man, barely more than a boy, carrying a small rifle awkwardly. He had arrived late after hearing the rumors of approaching danger. His face was pale, eyes wide with fear and determination at the same time. The Apache man noticed him, assessing quickly. The boy could help, if given direction, but he could also become a liability. "Stay close," the man said, voice low. "Follow my lead. Do not panic." The boy nodded, gripping the rifle as though it were a lifeline. The shadowed figure from earlier remained at the edge of the street, observing. There was no movement, no indication of loyalty, only a quiet assessment that made everyone uneasy. The woman felt a chill, wondering if this newcomer was friend or foe, or perhaps someone with a purpose that went beyond this town entirely. The sun disappeared behind the hills, and darkness crept over the streets like a living thing. Lanterns were lit in the homes, casting small pools of light that did little to pierce the growing gloom. The Apache man adjusted his stance, his hands brushing the barrel and the walls, imagining every angle from which the attackers might emerge. From the canyon, the sound of hooves grew, faint but rhythmic. Dust lifted in small waves, then larger clouds, and the shapes of riders began to take form against the dimming light. Their movement was precise, calculated, almost military in nature. They were not simply bandits. They were a force with intent, a threat that had planned its approach carefully. The woman returned to the doorway where she had hidden the baby. She peeked out, careful not to be seen. The riders were moving faster now, some breaking away from the main group to circle the town, testing its defenses. One of them raised a hand, signaling, and the wind carried the faint sound of voices she could not understand. The Apache man scanned the perimeter, noting their formation. He could see the plan even before it had fully unfolded. They were probing for weakness, looking for someone to force into error. He tightened his jaw, aware that the first mistake could cost lives. From behind the shelter of the house, the young boy shifted nervously. "I don't think we can stop them," he whispered. "You can if you stay focused," the Apache man replied, his voice calm but firm. "Fear is what they rely on. Ignore it, and you survive." Meanwhile, the shadowed figure moved closer to the edge of the street, stepping into the faint light of a lantern. His eyes were fixed on the approaching riders, his posture relaxed but alert. The woman felt a strange mixture of fear and curiosity. He was clearly not aligned with the townspeople or the Apache man, yet he did not carry the same tension as the attackers. His purpose remained unknown, a puzzle she could not yet solve. The first rider reached the edge of town. He slowed, scanning the street, and the others adjusted in response, splitting into small groups. The townspeople stiffened, gripping weapons and silently praying they would not be the first to fall. The Apache man crouched behind the barrel, calculating trajectories, timing, and cover. Every step, every movement of the enemy was now part of a larger mental map of survival. Inside her house, the woman whispered to the baby, her voice trembling, "It's okay, little one. We're ready." She did not know if the words would carry truth or if they were simply a comfort for herself as much as for the child. The Apache man rose slightly, peering over the barrel. The lead rider had stopped, signaling once again. There was a faint hiss of voices and the sound of metal clinking against leather. This was more than a raid. It was organized, deliberate, and personal. The townspeople began to murmur, some questioning if they had made the right decision in staying, others wishing they had fled while there was still time. The Apache man ignored them, focusing on the dust clouds, the shadows of movement, the subtle shifts that revealed intent. Suddenly, a rider broke from the main group and charged directly toward the center of town. The Apache man's instincts kicked in. He grabbed the boy and pulled him to cover, signaling with his free hand for others to do the same. The woman clutched the baby tighter, heart hammering as the sound of hooves thundered closer. The rider skidded to a stop in front of the general store, raising a rifle and shouting commands in a language the townspeople did not understand. He waved a hand, and several others dismounted, moving quickly to surround the center of town. Dust swirled around their boots, making the air gritty and tense. The shadowed figure stepped forward, hands empty, but his presence alone drew the attention of the attackers. There was a pause in the motion of the riders, a hesitation that made everyone aware of the strange balance of power in the street. The Apache man lowered himself again, pulling the boy down beside him. He whispered, "Watch the corners. Watch the shadows. Move only if I signal." The woman's hands trembled, holding the baby as the first riders began to spread out. The town's barricades creaked under movement, and the faint glow of lanterns cast long, flickering shadows that made the attackers seem larger than they were. From the hills, a wind carried a faint whistle again, and with it came the distant sound of another group approaching. The Apache man's eyes narrowed. The attackers in town were only part of the threat. Another wave could arrive at any moment. He pressed a hand to the boy's shoulder, a silent reminder that focus would mean survival. The shadowed figure finally spoke, voice carrying across the street. "You think you know the danger, but you only see what is in front of you. The road behind hides more than dust." The Apache man's jaw tightened. "We survive what comes. We adapt. That is all we can do." The rider in the center of town motioned to his group again, and they advanced carefully, rifles raised. The townspeople's whispers rose to shouts, and tension twisted the air like a rope pulled tight. The woman held the baby close, heart pounding in rhythm with the hooves. A small child peeked from a window above, and the Apache man's eyes flicked to it. He could not risk the distraction. The girl had to stay hidden, safe, unseen. Every person, every decision mattered now, and the weight of responsibility pressed down heavier than the dust in the street. From the canyon, another rider emerged, circling back toward the town's edge. The Apache man noticed him immediately, recognizing the pattern. A pincer move, designed to trap them in the center, to stretch defenses thin. His mind raced, calculating positions, possible cover, and timing. The shadowed figure shifted, moving closer to the riders, yet never engaging directly. The townspeople noticed the subtle tension between him and the attackers, and fear mixed with curiosity. Who was he really? Friend, foe, or something beyond understanding? The Apache man rose to a crouch behind the barrel again. "Hold your ground. Do not give them what they seek?" His voice was low but carried authority, slicing through the murmurs. The young boy nodded, eyes wide but steady. Lantern light flickered across rifles and dust, wind carrying the faint scent of sweat and leather. The street held its breath as riders advanced, cautious but determined, unaware that every move they made was being calculated, measured, and observed. The woman whispered to herself, barely audible, "Please, let them make it through the night." The Apache man glanced at her, then toward the approaching riders, then back at the boy. Every life, every choice, every movement mattered now. And yet, he could not see the full shape of what was coming. Only the edges, only the hints, only the tension that would not break until the first action, until the first shot, until the first choice had been made. The wind picked up again, dust swirling, carrying the faint whistle of the canyon riders and the distant sound of hooves. The shadowed figure's presence remained, an unknown variable that made every decision sharper, more deliberate. The Apache man adjusted his stance, ready for what was coming. But knowing that survival would demand more than strength, it would demand courage, patience, and perhaps a measure of mercy yet again. In that moment, the town hung in fragile balance, caught between the calm before the storm and the storm itself. The Apache man, the woman, the boy, and the shadowed figure all understood the stakes. Yet no one could know how the events would unfold. Only the dust, the wind, and the approaching riders held the answer, and their judgment would not wait for anyone's hesitation. And somewhere beyond the hills, another movement stirred, another threat watching, waiting, sharpening its approach. The story of the little girl, the Apache man, and the woman who had given her milk was far from over. The next hours would test every bond, every choice, and every ounce of courage they possessed. The night was closing in, the town tense, the attackers poised, and the shadowed figure unmoving. Everything depended on what came next, and no one in the street knew if they would see the dawn. Night had fully descended, a heavy curtain over the town that made every shadow seem alive. Lanterns flickered weakly in doorways, casting long, unsteady light across the dusty streets. The Apache man crouched behind the barrel once more, the boy close at his side, both listening intently to the distant thunder of hooves and the whispered movements of the approaching riders. Every nerve in his body was alert, every breath measured. This was not just survival. This was preparation for the impossible. The shadowed figure moved with purpose along the edges of the street, careful to avoid drawing the attention of the riders, yet close enough to influence them with subtle gestures and pauses. The townspeople were frozen, holding their rifles and knives, eyes wide as the tension climbed like a coiled spring. One wrong move now could cost lives. One misjudged step could set everything on fire. A scream rose suddenly from the far end of the street, high and piercing, the sound of panic. A rider had stumbled, or perhaps a townsperson had been spotted too early. The Apache man's hand shot out, grabbing the boy and pressing him down into the shadows. "Stay low," he whispered, voice hard but calm. "Do not move until I say?" The riders hesitated for a moment, scanning the street. The lead man shouted something in a language the Apache man did not recognize. His eyes followed the movements closely, noting the shift in formation, the way they circled toward weak points in the barricades. He could predict their next move, but only if everyone remained disciplined, only if fear did not break their focus. The woman clutched the baby tightly in the corner of her house, listening to the distant shouts and hooves. Her heart raced. The little girl stirred, sensing the tension even in sleep, and she murmured softly. The woman kissed her forehead. "Just a little longer," she whispered. "Hold on." Suddenly, a rider broke away from the main group, charging straight toward the house at the end of the street. The Apache man reacted instantly, grabbing the boy and pulling him to the ground. His hand brushed against the rifle, and he could see the trajectory in an instant. The rider's intent was clear: strike first, test the defenses, and spread fear. The shadowed figure moved as well, stepping into the faint light to intercept the charging rider. There was no noise, no shout, only the swift motion of a body meeting another body. The rider faltered, barely managing to maintain his horse, and the tension rippled through the street. The Apache man's eyes narrowed. This stranger, whose allegiance remained unclear, had made a move that might buy them just enough time. From the hills, more dust clouds were rising, signaling the arrival of reinforcements for the attackers. The Apache man knew they were outnumbered, yet he remained calm. Strategy, speed, and precision were all he had, and he had honed them through years of necessity. He gestured to the townspeople, moving them into better positions behind the barricades. Every hand, every weapon, every ounce of courage mattered now. The lead rider finally reached the center of the street, shouting orders that no one understood but everyone felt. The townspeople tensed, ready to fire, ready to defend their homes, ready to protect the child who had been the reason for everything so far. The Apache man's eyes swept over the faces, reading fear, determination, and a growing sense of trust. They would have to fight together or fall alone. The shadowed figure made another subtle movement, drawing the attention of two riders and creating a small opening. The Apache man seized it, signaling to the boy and to a few of the more capable townsmen. They raised their rifles, aiming with precision. The first shots rang out, sharp and loud, echoing against the wooden buildings. Dust and shadow swirled together as the fight began in earnest. From the house, the woman held the baby tight, whispering encouragement even as her body shook. She had faced danger before, but this was different. This was organized, relentless, and alive. She could hear the shouts, the clatter of hooves, and the soft cries of fear that came from those too young to understand. Her heart ached, but she knew she could not falter. The child depended on her, and so did everyone else. The Apache man moved along the barricades, directing, encouraging, calculating. A rider attempted to flank from the left, and he adjusted, stepping into the open just long enough to intercept, then pulling back behind cover. Each move was deliberate, each decision carrying the weight of life and death. The boy followed, imitating the movements carefully, learning faster than most would under such pressure. The shadowed figure now moved closer to the attackers, his body fluid and deliberate. The riders hesitated, unsure if he was a threat or merely a distraction. The Apache man noted every detail, knowing that every hesitation could be exploited, and every misstep could cost someone dearly. From the canyon, more hoofs thundered. Reinforcements for the attackers had arrived, circling around, cutting off escape routes. The town was becoming a trap, and yet the Apache man did not panic. He adjusted positions, moved the townspeople into tighter formations, and signaled the boy to stay close. Every moment, every breath was now critical. The lead rider, frustrated by the unexpected resistance, shouted and gestured violently. His men reacted, tightening their formation, preparing for a direct assault. Dust rose in clouds around their boots, and the Apache man calculated the angles, imagining where bullets would fly, where people might stumble, where the weak points would show themselves first. Inside her house, the woman could hear the chaos outside and could feel it vibrating through the walls. She pressed the baby closer, whispering softly, trying to drown out the fear with quiet words of comfort. She did not know if it would work, but she knew that hope, even small and fragile, was a weapon in its own right. The first clash came at the edge of the street, where the shadowed figure met a pair of raiders head-on. There was no sound of struggle beyond the harsh contact, no cry, only movement and sudden shifts. The Apache man took note, recognizing that even this unknown presence was influencing the fight in a way no one else could. A rider broke through a barricade further down the street, and the townspeople's rifles rang out in response. The sound was deafening, echoing off the buildings, and for a moment, fear threatened to overwhelm courage. The Apache man raised his hand, steadying them, reminding them to focus, to act, to survive. The attackers adapted, spreading out into smaller groups, probing for gaps, testing the defenses. The Apache man countered, moving like a shadow, predicting their moves, signaling townspeople to shift positions, to cover each other, to create layers of defense that would slow them, confuse them, and buy more time. The shadowed figure made another subtle move, drawing the attention of 3 riders at once. They hesitated, unsure of his speed and intent, and in that hesitation, the Apache man and his small group gained the advantage. Rifles fired, horses skidded, and dust mixed with the night air. The tension became almost unbearable, a constant hum that wrapped around every heart in the street. From the hills, a faint whistle rose again, closer this time, signaling yet another wave of attackers. The Apache man's jaw tightened. This was no longer a raid. This was a siege, a test of endurance and skill. The townspeople were starting to show cracks in their composure, but he remained steady, moving among them, offering guidance, giving orders, instilling a quiet confidence that perhaps they could survive this night. The woman peeked from the doorway, eyes wide, trying to make sense of the chaos. Dust swirled around figures moving with precision and intent. Bullets kicked up dirt, and the sounds of hooves and shouts mixed with the clash of bodies. She could not see clearly, but she could feel the danger, intense and immediate, wrapping around every breath. The Apache man glanced at her, then at the boy. "Stay close," he said. "Do not move. Watch, learn, survive." His voice carried authority and urgency, but beneath it, there was a careful undercurrent of reassurance. They would need every ounce of courage to see what came next. The lead rider barked more orders, his voice harsh, cutting through the night. His men spread, pushing closer to the barricades, testing the defenses that had been hastily prepared. The Apache man noted every movement, predicting paths, calculating timing, anticipating attacks. Survival depended on precision now more than ever. The shadowed figure moved in a fluid arc, intercepting a rider attempting to breach the center of town. The two clashed with a suddenness that left everyone frozen for a heartbeat, unsure whether to act or hold their positions. The Apache man watched carefully, recognizing that the unknown figure's movements were key to holding the balance of the fight. From the far end of the street, a rider broke away from the main group and charged toward the barricade near the woman's house. She froze, heart hammering, but the Apache man reacted instantly, moving to intercept, signaling the boy to cover a side opening. The rider faltered slightly, uncertain, giving just enough time for the barricade to hold and the townspeople to respond. Another wave of dust rose from the canyon, signaling that the attackers were relentless. The Apache man adjusted positions again, moving quickly from one point to another, ensuring that every angle was covered. The townspeople followed his lead, adrenaline sharpening their focus, fear tempered by determination. The shadowed figure remained in motion, weaving through the chaos, creating openings and distractions, never fully revealing intent. The townspeople began to rely on him, though they did not understand why. He was an unknown variable, a force that had shifted the momentum slightly in their favor. The night pressed in around them, every moment stretching longer, every breath heavy with tension. The Apache man knew the climax of this confrontation was near, that the attackers would make one final push, one decisive strike that could end it all. He could feel it in the rhythm of their movement, the way the dust rose and fell, the way the shadows shifted along the street. The woman held the baby closer, whispering words she barely believed, trying to keep calm even as the sounds outside grew louder, more urgent. She could feel the fear of the townspeople around her, the unspoken worry that none of them would survive if the attackers found the right opening. The Apache man's eyes swept over the street one last time before the final push. Every barricade, every rifle, every movement of the townspeople was accounted for. The shadowed figure positioned himself where he could influence the attackers at a critical point. The boy crouched low, gripping his small rifle, ready to act on command. From the hills, the distant sound of hooves rose again, faster this time, closer. The lead rider signaled. The attackers were about to commit fully to make their final strike against the town. The Apache man's muscles tensed, his mind focused on survival, protection, and the small child whose life had set all of this in motion. The night was ready to erupt, and every heartbeat, every breath, every flicker of shadow counted. The streets of the town were alive with tension, the dust heavy in the air, and the approaching riders poised to test courage, mercy, and the strength of every person who had chosen to stand their ground. The Apache man adjusted his stance one last time, glancing at the woman and the baby. "Hold on," he whispered, voice low but firm. "Everything depends on what comes next." The wind carried the faint whistle of the canyon again, closer than ever, a reminder that the storm was imminent. The shadowed figure moved, deliberate, ready to influence the coming clash. The riders tightened their formation, hooves pounding, dust swirling, the night alive with threat. And in that moment, the town, the Apache man, the woman, the boy, and the unknown figure held their breath, waiting for the final surge of action that would decide everything, aware that nothing would ever be the same once it began. The first clash rang out like a gunshot in the night, and everything that had been coiled in tension finally released. Dust swirled in the street as rifles fired, hooves thundered, and the sharp commands of the lead rider cut across the chaos. The Apache man moved with precision, stepping into the open only when necessary, directing the townspeople to cover weak points and using the terrain to his advantage. Every movement counted, every second was measured, and for the first time, the attackers hesitated. The shadowed figure struck again, moving swiftly to intercept a pair of riders trying to flank the barricade. The two collided, the figure twisting with the momentum, throwing one from his horse and forcing the other to retreat. His movements were so fluid, so controlled, that the townspeople watched in awe, realizing that the unknown ally had been the turning point. The Apache man did not hesitate. He seized the opportunity to move closer to the center of the street, where the lead rider was trying to rally his men. The boy crouched beside him, eyes wide but focused, rifle raised. "What do I do?" he whispered. "Watch and follow," the Apache man replied. "Shoot only when I say." His voice was calm, but the urgency in it sharpened every sense. The boy nodded, gripping the weapon tightly. The lead rider, realizing that the momentum had shifted, signaled for a retreat, but the Apache man had already anticipated this. He moved forward, cutting off the path, his presence commanding and unwavering. The shadowed figure positioned himself behind the remaining riders, forcing them to hesitate under the impression that reinforcements might appear from unexpected directions. The townspeople, emboldened by the Apache man's strategy and the shadowed figure's interventions, began to fight with surprising courage. Shots rang out with purpose, barrels and fences were used to push back, and the attackers' formation broke under the pressure. Dust filled the street, and the rhythm of battle slowed as fear and confusion spread among the riders. One rider charged too close, underestimating the defense, and the Apache man intercepted, using precise timing to disarm him and force him down without harm. The boy mirrored the action from behind a barricade, helping to subdue another attacker under his careful supervision. Each movement was deliberate, controlled, and effective. The woman emerged from her house cautiously, still holding the baby, and saw the street transformed. The chaos of the attackers was being turned back by strategy, courage, and the determination to protect the town. Her heart surged with hope. She moved closer to the barricades, offering blankets and water to those who needed support. quietly becoming a backbone for the frightened townspeople. From the hills, the remaining attackers hesitated, realizing that their plan had failed. The Apache man's strategy, combined with the shadowed figure's interventions, had turned the tide. Riders began to retreat, breaking into smaller groups to avoid confrontation, their confidence shattered. The sound of hooves faded, replaced by the distant clatter of dust and the muted shouts of those retreating into the night. The shadowed figure finally stepped forward into the light, revealing features that had been hidden in shadow. The townspeople, including the woman and the Apache man, took a step back, uncertain. Yet there was no threat in his posture now. Instead, there was calm, authority, and a quiet reassurance that lingered in the air. "You've done well," he said simply. "The danger has passed. For now." His eyes met the Apache man's, and in that brief exchange, understanding passed between them. No words were needed. The town had survived, the child was safe, and the immediate threat was over. The Apache man breathed deeply, feeling the tension finally release. He lowered the boy to the ground, clapping him lightly on the shoulder. "You were brave," he said. The boy's eyes shone, a mix of relief and pride. He had learned more in these hours than most would in months. The woman approached, still holding the baby, and her voice trembled with emotion. "Is it over?" she asked. "For tonight," the Apache man replied. "They will not return here soon, not after what happened. We've bought ourselves time." His eyes softened as he glanced at the baby, the small child who had been the reason for so much courage, strategy, and risk. The baby stirred and cooed, as if sensing the relief and safety surrounding her. The townspeople began to emerge from their hiding places, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. Relief mingled with exhaustion, and murmurs of gratitude swept through the street. They looked at the Apache man and the shadowed figure with respect and awe, recognizing that survival had not been possible without their guidance. The woman placed the baby in a small cradle she had prepared, sitting beside it as if to shield her from the memory of the chaos. The Apache man approached her, his expression steady, though fatigue tugged at his shoulders. "You did well," he said softly. "Your courage kept her safe." Tears welled in her eyes. "I just did what I had to," she whispered. "Like you did." The shadowed figure turned to leave, moving toward the edge of town. The townspeople called out thanks, but he only nodded briefly. His work here was done, and his purpose had been fulfilled. The Apache man watched him go, sensing that this was a rare kind of help, one that came without expectation, one that left a quiet mark on those it touched. The Apache man turned back to the town. The barricades could be dismantled slowly, the frightened could be comforted, and the wounded tended. The boy helped distribute water and blankets, learning that courage was not just about fighting but about helping, guiding, and standing firm when fear was all around. As the night deepened, the woman finally allowed herself to rest, sitting with the baby wrapped securely in her arms. She looked at the Apache man, who remained standing in the street, scanning the horizon even though the attackers were gone. "Will they come back?" she asked. "They might," he admitted, voice calm but realistic. "But we are stronger now. We are prepared. And we have learned what we are capable of." His eyes softened as he looked at the child. "And this little one, she has given more than we can measure. She reminded us of why we fight, why we protect, and why courage matters." The townspeople slowly gathered, sharing stories of what they had done and seen, each voice adding to the sense of community that had been forged in the fire of fear. The woman joined them, holding the baby, her heart lighter than it had been in days. She realized that even in the darkest moments, courage and compassion could guide people through. The Apache man finally allowed himself to sit, resting against the barrel where he had spent so many hours. The boy sat beside him, exhausted but proud. The streets were quiet now, dust settling like a soft blanket over the town. The wind whispered through the buildings, carrying the faint scent of smoke, dust, and something sweeter relief, survival, and hope. The woman placed the baby on her lap, smiling gently as the child gurgled and reached for her finger. "You are a brave little one," she whispered. "You reminded us all of what matters," the Apache man nodded. "And sometimes," he said, "the smallest among us can teach the greatest lessons. Courage is not measured by size or strength, but by the choices we make when faced with fear." From the street, the townspeople began to clear debris, repairing doors, reinforcing walls, and helping those who had been pushed to the edges of fear. Each act of care and cooperation was a small victory, a tangible proof that the town had survived not by luck, but by courage, unity, and the determination to protect what was precious. The shadowed figure had gone, leaving only the memory of his presence and the impact of his actions. The Apache man and the woman exchanged a quiet glance, both aware that this night would be remembered long after the dust had settled. The boy climbed onto the barrel beside the Apache man. "Will it always be like this?" he asked softly, voice tinged with awe and lingering fear. "No," the Apache man replied, "but we will always remember what we learned. That even in the face of danger, we can protect, we can survive, and we can find courage when we need it most." The woman smiled down at the baby, rocking her gently. "And we have learned that kindness and courage matter," she said. "Even a small act, even a simple choice, can change everything." The town, now calm and quiet, seemed to breathe for the first time since the danger had arrived. Windows were opened to let the cool night air in, lanterns were extinguished one by one, and the streets grew silent, filled only with the sounds of gentle movement and whispered conversations. The Apache man rose, looking toward the horizon. The hills were quiet, but he knew that danger could appear again. Yet for the first time that night, he felt a deep sense of certainty. The town had survived, the child was safe, and the people had learned something more valuable than any weapon or barricade: the strength to stand together when the world threatened to tear them apart. The woman, holding the baby, joined him outside. The stars were scattered across the sky, distant and unyielding, yet beautiful in their permanence. "Do you think we will always remember this?" she asked. "We will," the Apache man replied, "because it showed us who we are when we are tested. It showed us what matters most: courage, compassion, and the willingness to protect those who cannot protect themselves. These are the things that define us." The boy joined them, still wide-eyed but proud. "I will remember too," he said. "I want to be brave like you." "You already are," the Apache man said. "Bravery is not about fighting. It's about choosing what is right when it is hardest. You have done that today." The baby cooed softly, reaching out with tiny hands, as if acknowledging the end of the night's terror. The woman held her close, smiling through tears of relief. The Apache man watched them, a rare, quiet smile crossing his face. For now the world felt safe, and the town would heal. The wind carried the faint scent of morning, hinting at a new day where the town could rebuild, where fear would fade, and where the small acts of courage milk shared, lives protected, and hearts kept strong would live on in memory. The Apache man, the woman, the boy, and the baby stood together in the street, united by what they had survived and strengthened by what they had learned. And in that quiet moment, with the stars overhead and the first light just beginning to touch the hills, the town felt whole again. The danger had passed, the attackers gone, and hope had returned, gentle but unyielding, like the dawn itself. The little girl stirred in her mother's arms once more, smiling in sleep, and the Apache man placed a steady hand on the woman's shoulder. "We did it," he said softly. "Together." And with that, the night's terror became a story of courage, compassion, and survival, one that would be remembered, shared, and cherished. The town had endured, the child had been protected, and the people had learned the true strength of unity, hope, and the human heart.